year on the school board, I never expected to have the chance to talk about what I do professionally. While it is a sometimes uncomfortable subject, I'm deeply passionate about my work and I'm very proud of my accomplishments. Over 15 years ago, I published my story of being raped at the age of 14, and with a surge of support from fellow survivors who connected with me through my blog's Facebook presence, I developed a professional network of writers and activists working towards similar goals. My blog grew into a speaking career, moved to the Chicago Tribune, and was published on 5 continents, while its associated Facebook page remained as it was. In addition to my writing under my own name, I began empowering other survivors to tell their stories through organizations that specifically serve survivors of human trafficking. For years, my job was to learn the most horrific details of these children's stories and to find ways to use those experiences as an advocacy tool. In addition to writing about sexual and domestic violence, I tell stories about my own life beyond the scope of my race. I write about mental illness, the complexity of parenting with a dying spouse, and about the grief of widowhood. Through my work, I've been able to partner with organizations combating postpartum depression, run campaigns to provide support to children orphaned by gun violence, spoken at protests exposing the sexual exploitation of detained children, and much more. The more I write, the more hate mail I receive. I've learned many lessons about the difference between protected free speech and harassment, and the difference between a statement that offends and bullying. Writing my own thoughts on my own blog might be annoying to some, but it's not harassment or bullying. What makes speech bullying or harassment is when it is used repeatedly to intimidate and to threaten harm. As a professional writer, and one who writes about my own life, I've always been careful to maintain boundaries between what is public and what is by necessity private. In the months since I joined the board, the content of my work has not changed. What has changed is the access people have to me as a person with whom they disagree, and their ability to use my work to gain access to myself and the people near me. 2 weeks ago, people from outside of McHenry County began sending me harassing messages regarding posts on my blog's social media. They created false identities online, including on Facebook, and began attempting to rally others to join them in sending messages of the sort I would rather not repeat. People in the community groups where they posted responded overwhelmingly that this was why they'd voted for me in the first place, that I was continuing to push the same message about preventing the sexual exploitation of children, and that my advocacy for survivors of sexual and domestic violence was why they wanted me on the board. About a week after this harassment started, it reached the attention of a few locals, including people who had actively opposed my candidacy last year, ostensibly on the basis of my support for our district's gender nonconforming students. I assured these folks that my opinions were not partisan or based in a particular ideology, but rather in statistics and research. I knew, due to my role working for organizations that serve survivors of human trafficking and sexual violence, these children are astronomically more likely to be victimized by adults, bullied by their peers, and to attempt suicide. This is precisely what I said, that regardless of any details of their lives, my priority was that everyone live. In response, somebody opposed to my candidacy began spreading absurd rumors about me online, making outrageous claims with no bearing in fact. These people who spent the election season making absurd claims based on misrepresentations of my work from a decade ago began a campaign of complaints to the board about my presence. Their specific example was a selectively cropped screenshot of a months-old social media post echoing the message I've been sharing continuously for 15 years, that it is unacceptable to excuse sexually exploiting children. The cropped images cut out the context of the Epstein files, and I will not further distract from this meeting by going into details about the horrible things I was responding to. Suffice to say, my words about people actively working to normalize child abuse were removed not only from the context of the immediate subject, but also the context of a professional Facebook page dedicated to fighting against the sexual exploitation of children. When I write, it is with an expectation that I know my audience. This is the first rule of publishing: know your audience. And the audience of my blog knows me. I do not need to introduce every story or post with years of background. But in addition to the context removed from my advocacy for bringing child abusers to justice, context was removed from a second post as well, although in this case I do not believe it was intentional. As a writer in the political sphere in the Chicago suburbs within the past decade, Charlie Kirk and I had a professional history. As a gun violence prevention advocate, one of the many areas in which we disagreed publicly, I felt compelled to comment on his murder, not to mock and belittle, as he had done after my sister's 2000 death from COVID, but to acknowledge the complex feelings I had as a person occasionally in his orbit. Whatever my disagreements with Charlie Kirk were, one issue on which we agreed was that nobody should be protected after sexually exploiting children. Since his assassination, the trickle of communication to this board regarding my career has increased, while aggressive and violent messages pour into my blog's social media. Leaders of a local political party are encouraging their members to join them in opposing my presence on the board. The use of speech being questioned is not through my role on the board, makes no mention of board business, and has no connection with my position as a public servant. That makes this a coordinated, politically motivated campaign to target me as an individual, exploiting national shock and confusion to assert control of a board seat against the will of the voters. I believe this to be the case because of how hard one must try to sift through my content to find any word choices that could be interpreted this broadly, skipping past months of posts that praise pro-life organizations and many other identical news stories without the same level of expressed frustration. Were these complaints regarding my votes on the board, my conduct in my role as a member of the board, or even about me communicating on behalf of the board, this would be a different discussion. But that's not what it is, and legitimizing the narrative that a difference in emotions regarding a public execution is itself a much greater distraction from conducting business than the content of my work. To those who do not approve of their interpretation of the tone of my single sentence acknowledging the murder of Charlie Kirk, I want to be clear. I feel for Charlie Kirk's wife and children, and for everyone who knew and loved him. I don't have to imagine what they're going through. I know it intimately as a widow. For his widow, I want the same supports that I found eventually for myself when I was widowed in my 30s as well. And despite the conflicts I've described, I would advise her to look online for those communities. I want Charlie Kirk's children what I want for mine, a world where their fathers are alive to support them and comfort them. My work, as I've mentioned, focuses as well on bereavement and is full of resources for new widows, navigating the world with children, guidelines for how to approach those losses, and compassion for spouses and children confronting a painfully different life. I hope some of those resources make their way to the Kirk family as they begin their grief journey. I want to say that I'm sorry my work has impacted this board. As writing is my profession, and as a member of the board, I am an unpaid volunteer. I'm therefore not at leisure to stop. I pledge to revisit that first rule, know your audience, and to that end address the reality that my readership is changing now that I've drawn the attention of people opposed to ideals they believe I represent. I will say what I've said before. All of us on this board want the same thing, which is whatever is best for our kids. That is not a political opinion. We are all capable of communicating with each other, regardless of our personal beliefs. in order to come to decisions to make life better for all of the kids in our care. I think of this role the way I do jury duty. My job in this room is impartiality, reason, and compassion. I'm not here to push an ideology, and I believe that my tenure will ultimately reflect that truth. Thank you for the time that you volunteered to the work of the board, and for dedicating time away from that work to listen to me talk about my passion. And to everyone joining us this evening, thank you for coming out and participating in the conversation about the needs of our kids. I know you care who is sitting here, and I appreciate the respect you've offered me as I take this unusual opportunity to introduce myself to you fully. I hope we can continue to work together with greater understanding.